And may I request Mr. Jeffrey Payne to please come up and deliver his presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Admiral, for the introduction. Thank you to the Indian Navy for not only your leadership, but the warm welcome and the hospitality. Our old friendship with the National Maritime Foundation is always appreciated, and we look forward, not only myself, but my institution, the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies, or NESA, because as an American, I don't want to use that many words. We look forward to the ongoing partnership with MMF going forward. I'm here to talk about MDA, and there's a lot of ways you can talk about it. There's a lot of ways you can argue about it. There's a lot of things to get into, but the emphasis today is how do we network all of the progress we have made so far within maritime domain awareness. And if I could get the next slide, or if there is a green button, thank you. So, the problem set when it comes to the maritime domain, everyone in this room is well aware of it. We have a problem of scale. The maritime domain is immense. No single actor, no matter how well equipped, no matter how vigilant, immensely complicated and therefore immensely expensive. The amount of data, the pure amount of data that you have to factor into operations at sea can drive you mad, almost insane. And then also the issue of political will. How do we as a community rise up the policy ladder on the issues that essentially are at the core of our well-being as nation states tied to maritime trade or tied to maritime security? So, getting back to MDA, there are different ways that you can approach it. MDA in the United States is often defined through the security services, through the United States Coast Guard or through the United States Navy, but a kind of more expansive definition of maritime domain awareness can include a lot of different communities and a lot of different variables. These include experience or institutional memory, the actual sailors, the actual captains of vessels and what they've accumulated over a career, as well as the institutions they represent. The natural world and what it teaches us, the cycles we have learned from it and the data that it presents. Communal and cultural, which is often overlooked, what coastal communities can teach us and can provide to us, what they can provide in terms of insights or even issues pertaining to everything from environmental collapse to illegal or illicit activity. There's industrial commercial data, so what those who are at sea trying to accumulate profit are able to do in order to maximize that profit by securing their operations. Scientists in the scientific community. And then there's the technological side of things, everything from digital tools to machine learning, and even the overlays of patterns and various data streams. So where are we today in terms of data and in relation to maritime domain awareness, the good and the bad? Good news, the days of data drought are over. 20 years ago, trying to find or getting your hands on the data that defined the maritime domain was a very, very hard hike to make. Those days are gone. Now we have the almost exact opposite problem. There's a deluge of data. There's almost too much for a single institution to be able to process in a reliable fashion and a continuous fashion. We have the arrival of the sailor/data engineer. So it's not just being able to navigate at sea. You have to also understand how all of this data impacts what you're doing, whether you're supporting operations or you're actually at sea engaged in operations. A negative is that MDA has become crowded with a lot of interested parties. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of interest, but there's a lot of those interested parties at different scales of the ability ladder. Some are brand new to the game, others are much more progressed. How are they communicating? How are they interfacing? We haven't figured that out yet. As such, a lot of people that get interested in maritime domain awareness keep reinventing the wheel. Something that an actor has already done, you want to do it as well. often because you're not aware that that actor that came before you has already invested in these resources in this knowledge base. And then you have the connectivity that is forming, and this is a positive development, between NGOs, academia, private interest, and state entities. We're all starting to work together because we understand that the threat matrix and the challenges that are present throughout the maritime domain, no matter if you're based in India or the United States or in the Seychelles, are often the same. And then the naysayers are getting a little bit quieter on MDA. MDA was seen as a fad, something that temporarily sounded good in the halls of Congress or in the halls of Parliament or here in Delhi, but it really didn't impact, sailors or navies or coast guards. Those voices are getting quieter. We've seen the positive impact of investing in MDA. But then an ongoing conundrum, this is neither good or bad, but is how do we talk about this data? How do we get on the same language? What are we factoring in? How do we value it? How are we all starting to move forward in terms of progressing the idea of what we actually know about the maritime domain? State-initiated efforts. So MDA has traditionally been associated with states, navies, coast guards, other maritime constabularies. So you have, obviously, something to emphasize here is information fusion centers. So the IFC-IOR, which has already been brought up this morning as well as yesterday, as a place to compile data and then to interpret data and then to push it out to relevant communities. There are MDA-focused applications and digital programs, things such as the US Sea Vision or IORIS out of the European Union or IRIS out of Singapore. Other states have their own. India has its own software that it's developed. There are varying tools in different domains where maritime domain awareness knowledge bases have informed the construction of new constructs, of new methodologies. This includes everything from sensors, from conversations about low Earth orbit, satellite distribution, of networking, various tools that we traditionally haven't networked together. Machine learning, so things that really aren't even necessarily what you really think about in terms of operating on a naval vessel or even operating a commercial ship. And then other various applications or software that can help us get over the process of compiling and interpreting a massive amount of data. Other state-initiated efforts include experimentation, competitions, and contests. Now, taking the example of the United States, we have helped facilitate through publicly sponsored and financed contests for startup firms to essentially develop algorithms or other machine learning tools to interpret some maritime domain awareness data. And then once that's proven effective, it is integrated into our systems, and it's spread throughout both the public and private community. There's national proof of concepts. Again, taking the United States as an example, Task Force 59 that operates out of Fifth Fleet in Bahrain has stood up a networking system of maritime domain awareness in order to essentially have greater vision about the illicit actions that are occurring in that body of water. There's also the Defense Innovation Unit, which did a public-private contest related to what they called XView 3, which is using free-to-use data that's available that anyone in this room can get access to, and then interpreting it through algorithms and machine learning to try to see if there are patterns that emerge historically, and then using those patterns to try to predict where there might be a chance of illicit activity to emerge. And then there are exercises and training that are adding new tools, such as autonomous vehicles, AI, and then even the idea of signal hubs. Different in some ways from fusion centers, but the same kind of concept. So where do we stand now in terms of a network? There are a lot of networks that are formed in the private sector, in the public sector, some based regionally, some based globally, but there is no central hub. And that is a question for this entire audience. Should there be a central hub? And there is no global convener. Another question for this audience. Should there even be a global convener? State actors still direct a lot of the focus. So the Indian government or the American government or the Singaporean government or the Malaysian government, they will lead a lot of effort and focus and investment. But public-private partnerships have become a new tool to increase efficiency, to try to get beyond kind of sometimes the slow pace of governments and how they adapt to new technologies or new methodologies. So public-private partnerships is a way to make both sides get on the same page and work more efficiently. And then private sector actors themselves are realizing that there is a whole market out there related to maritime domain awareness. So how do we exploit that market? How can we use this data to sell it, whether it be to commercial shipping interests or even governments themselves? The tech industry is opening up to MDA as a possible vector for their own long-term operations. This includes the commercial revolution in orbit, which has been talked about, something that India is currently involved in, Japan, the United States, China, the European Union, a host of other states are seriously investing in. But also things tied to that commercial revolution in orbit, imagery filters, next generation commercial sensors, and again, machine learning and AI applications. There is no uniform network either. Some are commercially oriented, some are environmentally focused, so they're NGO-led, some are law enforcement tools, others are based upon scientific inquiry from biologists or other forms of scientific inquiry. But the network today is all pointing to the same kind of trend. There's no uniformity yet. There's a lot of chaos. We have to get comfortable with that chaos. But the next step is how we start acting on the data that we've accumulated. We know more today about what's going on at sea than probably any time in human history, comprehensively. And a lot of that's based upon the skill of personnel, scientific progression, technological innovation, economic investment. So how do we start using that data to become more efficient in terms of operating to erase or mitigate the threats that are present at sea? How do we stop the bad guys from exploiting resources or getting around laws or doing other things that harm good order at sea? And then to kind of wrap up with the final slide, horizon scan, looking towards the future. The chaos that is currently MDA on a global scale will continue. That's not going to go anywhere. I argue that that's not necessarily a bad thing. From chaos becomes innovation, and then over time, that chaos will merge into some type of order. Right now, new ideas are new ideas. If they work, they rise to the top. If they're not good or they don't work, they fall away. That's sort of the information we are. Right now, we're still a little hesitant about sharing information amongst each other, but honestly, the toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak, when it comes to maritime domain awareness. So intensifying our information sharing will become much more common. A downside in terms of the horizon is, and this has already been brought up, is the idea of what data do we trust? How do we determine that? How do we protect the data that we accumulate? And how do we standardize how this data is accumulated, stored, and shared amongst legitimate actors? And then a final thing that I'll mention, again, emphasizing the operational component, is we have to do something in order to discourage bad actors. That's part of what MDA is about, gaining knowledge about what's going on in the maritime domain, to see what's aberrant, to see where threats are emerging, to see where challenges are coming down the pipeline, and therefore, based upon that data, do a better job of mitigating or interdicting or even stopping said threat. So that is the real kind of next, in my argument, foray when it comes to maritime domain awareness and the way this network really becomes a kind of global partnership. How states adapt to the idea of getting comfortable sharing information and therefore starting to cooperate and coordinate on activities that are meant to discourage bad actors, whether it be more effective patrolling, whether it be naming and shaming, whether it be an understanding that bad actors just can't hide anymore, that their registries will be tracked, that the world will have greater knowledge about who's doing what and how. Things going on in the South China Sea, for instance, those actors cannot hide what they're doing because the world sees it because MDA has progressed so much. So that is, I think, where the network will merge together and become a much more powerful maritime tool for the entire community, those committed to the rules-based order, that is. So with that, I will wrap up with my gratitude again to not only all of you in this audience, but to the MMF and the Indian Navy for hosting me. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.